All these kids deserve a voice, and they all deserve, their families deserve justice.
My mission is for all of us San Antonio moms who didn't get heard 30 years ago to get heard and to keep that monster in prison where she needs to be. To us, it was going to be a routine in and out, and he never came out of it.
The nurse working that day in 1981 was Janine Jones. Rodriguez remembers her giving Feliciano his shot. The reaction was immediate.
Gasping for air and just turning blue. He goes into cardiac arrest right there in the office.
Rodriguez knew something was wrong, but she was 15, couldn't read at the time, and was the daughter of migrant farmers. No one paid attention.
Okay, how did this happen? Why did it happen? Can someone give me answers? And no one ever did.
Years later, Rodriguez found justification for her suspicions. Jones was arrested and charged with killing Chelsea McClellan. She gave the little girl an overdose of muscle relaxants while working as a pediatric nurse in Kerrville.
Some of the kids in the pediatric ICU are very sick, and that's kind of how Janine was able to hide, is because you kind of hide because they're very sick and some of them are going to be expected to not make it. But Rosemary was not one of those kids, and she was put in the pediatric ICU after she had just recovering from this surgery. And she started having those symptoms at around the same time on Janine Jones's shift when Janine Jones was in there with her.
Was this also Dilantin?
It wasn't Dilantin. So Rosemary was unknown. Like, we don't know what she did, but we do know that Rosemary's mother, also Rosemary, was in the room. She was 17 years old. She was a custodian at the hospital.
I trusted you with my daughter, and you would tell me, it's gonna be okay, Rosemary. My baby girl, Rosemary, never had a chance in life to go to school, to get married, and to have my grandbaby. I pray to God he'll never come out to her. No more babies in the world.
And she was in the room and watched Janine inject her, asked Janine, what are you doing? She said, I'm just going to help her sleep. Rosemary did a code right after that. The doctor that had operated on her was flabbergasted because he said there's no reason, there was no explanation for this child to die. There was no complications. Her heart was fine. There was no issue with that because he went personally down to watch it. We had Rosemary come testify, and the grand jury, when you hear a mother say that this woman, who is a baby killer, injected your child and immediately the child goes into a code blue and then the child dies, that's an eyewitness to a baby killer doing baby killer stuff.
There was an actual chart done of the number of children who died on all the other shifts versus the number of children who died on Janine's shift.
Yes, it said that you could take any other nurse and their chance of having something like this is like 2%. And then you look at her and it's like 70. The CDC did a fantastic report where they looked, and it's not just that. I think the more interesting thing in that report was the code blues. They did code blues by shift for each year. And it looks like a skyscraper next to your house is what it looks like when you look at the graph and you see think about your house or my house or whatever, 2 stories maybe. And then a skyscraper. That's the code blues that were going on.
And the skyscraper was the number of
all
code blues
on her shift. That's basically what was happening. Is that we had the advantage, right? Of we know that she is a known child killer, that she is a convicted child murderer, and that her MO and the way that she did it was by injecting children with medication that's typically available in hospitals. And doing it in such a way that will cause a code blue. Code blue is anything that is basically life and death. So the baby has stopped breathing, cardiac arrest, anything that requires immediate assistance of the baby will die. She's addicted to that. She's addicted to causing that code blue so that she can do it. It's not that she wanted them dead, it's that she wanted them hurt and then she wanted to save them. And I don't know what causes a person to do that.
How did Jones choose which children she was going to kill?
I think that it was just opportunity.
Melissa Luna was in court the day that Jones pleaded guilty in this most recent case. There for not only her mother, but the older brother she never knew.
She passed on December 11th, the morning of December 11th. She was pronounced at 5:30 a.m.
Melissa Luna never expected to say goodbye to her mother the way that she did. At 64 years old, Juanita Villarreal had a sudden onset of pneumonia. Her body shut down, and she died in hospice care just days later.
And I held her hand the whole night, and I'm sorry. I just couldn't, I had to hold her hand. You know, I had to let her know. That was my way of being able to let her go, to say, hey, you're not alone.
Luna had been by her mother's side long before she took her last breath. She was her mother's companion in court, helping Villarreal, who spoke mostly Spanish, understand each legal step in the case against her son's accused killer, Janine Jones.
This one it hurts to see this one.
Villarreal's son, Paul, died September 24th, 1981. He was 4 months old.
A baby in a casket for anybody, you know, whatever the cause was, it's hard, you know, and to know that he was murdered.
Paul was born with a deformed skull and had been in the hospital following surgery to correct it. Luna says her mother was told the procedure was a success.
She was told to go home the day that he died. She was told, hey, you know, everything's okay, he's gonna be taken care of, you know, and he's gonna go home, he'll be fine.
But hours later,
they call her and they're like, hey, you need to come to the hospital, your son's dead.
Luna says her mother never got clear answers after Paul's death, or even a chance to talk to a doctor. She was told her son had a heart problem. Decades later, prosecutors would allege Janine Jones injected baby Paul with a powerful drug that killed him.
A mother knows. A mother knows. So she knew. She knew that my brother didn't just die. She knew that something had happened to him.
You got to be a sick kid to be in the pediatric ICU, right? Like that's a given. If you're there, you're a sick kid. It's one of the reasons that when she went to Kerrville, that was where she really had a problem, because she couldn't hide in plain sight there. Because when you're working at a doctor's clinic, none of those kids are sick like that. That's not a pediatric ICU. And they had in 1 month, they had 7 babies going for breathing problems in Kerrville. And that's what really got those doctors in Kerrville, which is a small community, to say like, whoa, we haven't had 7 of these in 7 years. And now we got 7 in a month coming all out of the same clinic. And that's really what was going on in Kerrville. But while she was here in Bexar County before she went to Kerrville, she was able to kind of hide in plain sight because the babies were sick. Some of them may have been going to die, but she was able to kind of use her access to these medications and I guess her desire to, be the hero. And she was able to push that into them and try to get them to come back out of the code blue. Paul Villarreal was heparin all day. Like, Paul Villarreal was bleeding out of his eyes, and it was clear that he was getting a massive overdose of heparin. And Paul Villarreal was happening within a couple of weeks of Rolando Santos. And so what was going on there, you could see that like she had kind of chosen heparin by that point, and he was having blood come out his ears, his nose, his eyes, and you could see that it was a heparin overdose that was happening at the same time as the child she was convicted of intentionally overdosing with heparin. And thank God Rolando's still alive and he made it through, but Paul didn't. They found that Janine had been researching articles about how to fill up a needle with it and just jab it into somebody. After the line was taken out of Rolando Santos and he was still having those issues, Dr. Copeland suspected subcutaneous injection, which he was right, because that's what she was doing. She didn't have her normal way of doing it, so then she figured out a new way. The whole reason that Rolando is alive is that Dr. Copeland knew that there had to be somebody giving him an overdose of heparin, tried to move him off the floor after he saved him, because he said, I don't want him on this floor. So they actually put Rolando down in a different floor that Janine couldn't access. He didn't know it was Janine. He knew that somebody there was doing something.
Doctors at a now shuttered hospital in San Antonio noticed an unusual number of children dying and becoming gravely ill during Jones's nursing shifts. Jones left that hospital and moved to Kerrville. Prosecutors would later argue Jones was suspected of killing somewhere between 11 and more than 40 children.
No one will ever know exactly how many children Janine Jones killed. That's because the hospital she worked for here in San Antonio began shredding thousands of pounds of documents just as the investigation into the murders began to take shape. How did the doctors in the pediatric ICU unit not look at this and go, okay, this is not making sense. There is no reason that this child should be going through this at this particular moment, sick or not?
Sure. The best thing I can tell you is at the time the Bexar County Hospital was a teaching hospital. And so most of these doctors were still medical students or they were in their first year of their residency. So these were one-year doctors. A lot of doctors relied on nurses that seemed to know what they were doing, just like doctors do today. You got a nurse that's been on a floor for 10 years and you got these new doctors that are coming in.
So she found the perfect hunting ground for herself.
Right.
The hospital pretty much knew what was going on by the end.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that there is no reasonable way to look at it than that the administrators knew what was going on. I mean, I've actually seen, we've had copies of meetings and minutes where they've actually discussed it.
But when Janine went to Kerrville, they gave her a good recommendation.
Yes.
Why?
They said she was a great nurse. They said that anybody would be lucky to have her.
Even though they knew there was maybe not 100%, but a strong suspicion that she was behind these deaths.
Yeah, that's the only reason she went there is because they found a way to take her off the floor. And they definitely had already had those meetings about specifically Janine Jones by that point.
Yet they still gave her the good recommendation.
Yes, they did.
I'm the one that put that baby in the back of that hearse.
Chelsea's great-uncle, James McClellan, was relieved when a jury convicted Jones of his niece's death and sentenced her to 99 years in prison. But after serving barely a third of that sentence, Jones is scheduled for release in February of 2018.
Texas is going to release a serial killer of children.
Sometimes you think the world's going crazy.
Jones was sentenced under an old Texas law meant to alleviate prison overcrowding. That law allowed inmates to accrue so-called good time. For every day a prisoner behaves, they get to knock a day off the end of their sentence. Texas changed this law in the 90s, but the U.S. Supreme Court ruled the state could not apply that change to older cases like Jones's.
It's never been over. It has never been over. And now, it's really not going to be over.
I went with my mom as support, and we sat in a little victim's room, you know, outside of where the grand jury was being discussed the first time by Jason and that administration, whenever they did decide to indict.
What was that like?
Mom went in there and shared her heart and her story to them, and Jason and the proof and everything that they currently had. I mean, it didn't take long at all. We were told it could be something agonizingly long, but it didn't. And so, and then they came out. It was something like I didn't know if this was normal or not, obviously never being part of any of this, but I've heard from so many people, this grand jury came out and just hugged on the moms' necks as they exited the room. And I have pictures of it on my phone, actually. They just wanted to see these moms. They wanted to physically touch them and hug them and say, you know, I'm sorry. And I mean, you just don't hear about that.
What do you think ultimately was the tipping point that she finally said, fine, I'll plead to this?
You know, probably the food at the Bexar County Jail. I mean, you know, and really probably the conditions. And not that the conditions at the jail are like so terrible, but she got pretty comfortable in the penitentiary. You know, when she comes here, she's gonna be in this jail with people who are related to the babies that she killed. And they are gonna be there. There's a whole community. This community ain't like where she went to prison. Like, she's in prison and they don't know her from anybody else. But she's in a jail here with a lot of people who are related to or love or knew people that she killed and babies that she killed, or babies they believe that she killed. And that can't be comfortable. We all believed wholeheartedly that if she got the shot, she'd change her name, she'd be at some vacation Bible school somewhere. Some kids, some people that don't even know her, don't have any idea, she'd be volunteering at a daycare, and it would happen again. I mean, I don't think that she's ever lost that desire for the Code Blue. We got the records of the people in the parole, like the different parole employees that she talked to through the years. And that was one of the things that set us on a journey. Janine had come up for parole. She wasn't ever going to get it, not back then. But, you know, they always ask them, well, you know, I mean, are you admitting to what you did? And she did. But then she walked out, she got up and she was walking out of the room, and then she came back and she opened the door and she shut it and came back and sat down. And I said, I want to tell you something. And Miss Ferguson said, yeah, what do you want to tell me? She said, I really did kill those babies. And Miss Ferguson said she had the files, and and it was Rolando, and it was Chelsea. And she had the files, which is what she was convicted of. And she said, no, I'm not talking about those, the other ones.
So you had an on-the-record confession.
Basically, we had Marcy Ferguson, who was going to testify that that's what Janine Jones told her at the time.
So in the end, at least the mothers have that.
They do.
Even with Janine Jones in prison for another 30 or so years, the piece for my mom was that she was no longer having to feel any of that. So it was a big deal for our family too, and that's kind of how we got through her passing, was knowing that this no longer was on her.
When you look at Chelsea's grave, it forces you to understand there are as many as 60 more just like it, all because of one woman, Janine Jones, and the pain she caused continues to echo throughout Texas. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of The Evidence Room. We're heading back home for our season finale in the case of baby Grace. That streams next Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. on KPRC2+. For everyone on the KPRC2 Investigates team, I'm Robert Arnold. We'll see you next week.